Rolling.
Welcome, welcome very much. We've got a few people. It's raining in here. There's others coming, I know, here on October 3 of the year 2011. We're honored to have John Rafferty. He's the president of a really important organization. Very many people of good note who, particularly in this age where we're going to get very worried about maintaining critical thinking capability by the citizens. I think we're in the presidential election season, and we were just with Mr. Nadler the other night, and he and both Steny Hoyer were there, and they were both voicing their take on things political, saying that they just cannot believe the degree to which irrationality and compared to outdated thinking and issues that are anti-intellectual. It's a big problem, the Know-Nothing Party. They referred to the Know-Nothing Party from the 19th century, and it's likely to become really important that we have some critical thinking, and particularly along secular lines. And he's the president of an organization called the Secular Humanist Society of New York. And they've got a very large and important membership, and I'm very pleased he was able to come and talk to us tonight. And he's going to be talking about these, about the state of the world and also the society. And so without further ado, everybody settle in now, and everything. I'm trying to pretend like it's a classroom or something in 5th grade. But anyway, so let's give a welcome, and there will be people coming. There may be the buzzer ring and that. Please don't let that upset you. If you can help that. There'll be other people coming, and they'll join in and everything. So let's give a warm ACAP welcome to John Rafferty, please. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you, Harold, for the opportunity to speak to some of the movers and shakers in the media. When we at the Secular Humanist Society of New York were looking for a speaker,
I see.
Lee Loshak suggested Harold, and I wasn't familiar with the program, so I went online and I looked, he looks good, let's try to get him. And we did, and Harold is going to be the featured speaker at our Freethought Day brunch on October 16th.
Yes, sir, look forward to it.
And we're looking forward to that.
Incidentally, John, if I may, I didn't get a copy of PIQUE. Could that be sent to me, maybe? The newsletter?
I brought copies to give them.
Oh, good. Well, then that'll do it, yeah. It didn't come in the mail, but that's a sidebar. I'm sorry, I didn't do it. Yeah, I'll be happy to talk to them.
But anyway, Harold's going to talk to our group about some of the free thinkers, atheists, agnostics, humanists, rationalists, skeptics, whatever, that he has interviewed over the last almost
40 years. 41, 2 years.
Okay, over 40 years. Lee Loshak, by the way, is the Secular Humanist Society of New York's director of events, or the chairman of the events committee.
That's nice, right?
Everything.
Yeah.
If it has to do with events, he does it. And I hope we hope he's going to be joining your ranks soon as we bring a show on to Manhattan Neighborhood Network for the Secular Humanist Society.
Good.
I don't know if any of you are aware of it, but I'm the host of another Manhattan Neighborhood Network show, This Week in Atheist History, which is produced by the New York, is shortly, I hope, when we get our act together, going to produce a show. Probably the only time slot available would be 1 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning if we're lucky. Anyway, Lee will, I hope, shortly be joining you. At any rate, I haven't seen Harold's show, but I went online, checked with YouTube, here I saw it, I liked it, to paraphrase that old gospel song, friend we have on YouTube.
Yeah.
So, anyway, Harold's going to speak to us. So, Harold said I'm going to be talking about the state of the world. I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm going to talk about humanism in general, the humanist movement in New York and in America. And to begin with, I'll quote what my wife calls a secular human. My wife defines secular humanist as an atheist with good manners. And I think that's not bad. Not a bad one. Atheism is easy to understand. Atheists don't believe in God. That's the basics in 5 words. Atheists don't believe in God. And so when the question of belief comes up in current events like the so-called Mosque and Ground Zero last year, by the way, has everybody noticed that that is now open and nothing happened? It's the Islamic Cultural Center is open. It's operating. And the right wing didn't have any particular use for continuing the drumbeat against it, so nothing happened. Or the nonsensical miracle crucifix that's down at the old World Trade Center site right now. When one of these questions comes up, the mainstream media just runs to New York City atheists or American atheists, because everybody understands what atheist is. But don't get me wrong, I'm not denigrating New York's atheists. I'm a member, an active member. But there's a much bigger free-thought community in New York that I'd like to talk to you about tonight. And it's not just our organization, Secular Humanist Society of New York, SHSNY. So let me tell you where I came from on this. In the current issue of our newsletter, PIQUE, which I'll give you copies of when I'm finished here, I suggest to readers that they develop an elevator speech. What's an elevator speech? You get in an elevator, somebody you just met recently gets on the elevator and he or she says, I heard what you were talking about. What is secular humanism? You're on the 3rd floor. You know, he or she's getting off on the 9th floor. You got about 15 seconds. What do you say? Well, I wrote, in PIQUE, I developed several different ones, 15, 30, 60 seconds. But here's the quickie. Secular humanism is an ethical philosophy based on reason and science. It's a way of life for modern humans who want to live ethical, meaningful, and happy lives without superstition, religious dogma, or guilt. How does that sound to you? 15 seconds. You're done. My association with secular humanism began in 1998. I can't remember how I got on the mailing list for PIQUE, the newsletter, but somebody put me on the mailing list. And the 2nd or 3rd issue I got, I saw that it was going to be, that it said that a bunch of PIQUE members were going to go to the 92nd Street Y one Sunday coming up very soon, and hear Edwin Wilson talking about consilience, which consilience was the big intellectual buzzword of the 90s. I think, well, I ought to know. This is my favorite go. And then in the notice, PIQUE said, some of us are going to meet for lunch beforehand, before the Sunday afternoon lecture, and everybody's invited. So I'm thinking, what the hell? And I went over, and I went across the street from the Y and to a restaurant, walked in, and there were about a dozen old farts sitting at a table in the middle of the room, and I walked over to the table, and I leaned over and I said, is this the Misfits and Malcolms and Marching Society? And several of them laughed. And as soon as I laughed, I knew I was in the right place. I said, okay, that's good. And I sat down and went to the lecture. I had lunch with them, went to the lecture, got started talking, and that's how I began. At the time, in 1998, deep thinkers like Jerry Falwell and Newt Gingrich and Pat Robertson were calling secular humanists the basic problem in America. We wouldn't have so much crime, we wouldn't have high divorce rates, we wouldn't have all the problems that we had if it weren't for secular humanists. So I figured I ought to know these people. At any rate, I went to the lecture, I became a member, and as far as the lecture is concerned, I still don't know what the hell consilience is. Okay. The organization I joined Second Humanist Society of New York, was formed here in Manhattan in 1988 by what the minutes of the meeting called a dozen or so. And those dozen or so included members of the New York branches of the Skeptic Society, of Ethical Culture, the then existing New York chapter of the American Humanist Association. But they had a particular kind of humanism in mind, secular humanism, not religious or even spiritual. And they allied themselves with the still pretty new Council for Secular Humanism. There's a lot of different kinds of humanism. People are religious forms of humanism. There's humanistic Judaism is a real movement. There's even, I understand, recently formed some evangelical Christian humanists. I don't know how that works, but that's what they say. It's not hard to trace the history of the philosophy of humanism all the way back to the Renaissance in Europe, or even further back to Epicurus in ancient Greece. But humanism in America really comes out of New England transcendentalism of the 19th century, along with Reform Judaism and American Unitarianism. And out of American Unitarianism, for which people were hanged in Massachusetts in the 17th century, nevertheless, out of that grew out of that whole melding grew ethical culture. And ethical culture developed, and academia in the 1920s and early 1930s, after the horror of the First World War, and then the boom that the intellectuals saw was going to bust, there was a real leftward turn in humanism. And in 1933, the first Humanist Manifesto, and the biggest name on that manifesto was America's still most outstanding philosopher that America's ever produced, John Dewey, and 33 other intellectuals signed the first Humanist Manifesto in America. And interestingly enough, it called for a new religion, quote unquote, new religion. And that religion was supposed to be humanism. And in fact, the first words of the manifesto were religious humanists, ... and it also called for socialism. Socialism in all but name, because by 1933, of course, you all know what was going on in America and the world. The economy, society was in terrible shape. And it called, the manifesto called for a shared life in a shared world and radical change in the quote, existing, acquisitive, and profit-motivated society that has shown itself to be inadequate, unquote. Depths of the Depression. Humanism went along, bouncing along, went through the, in 1940, the American Humanist Association was formed, which tried to bring a lot of these little groups that had sprung up into one organization, which they did in 1940. And by 1973, following an even worse war, and after most of the American left had awakened to the problems of Soviet dictatorship, the American Humanists were ready to broaden their societal concerns. And two of the American Humanist Association's leading lights, Edwin Wilson and Paul Kurtz, produced Humanist Manifesto #2. That, quote, new religion, unquote, that Dewey wrote about and others in 1933 called for, that was gone, dropped out. Suddenly wasn't in 1973. It's still called, humanism was still called religious, but now the manifesto talked about varieties of naturalistic humanism, including scientific, ethical, democratic, religious, and Marxist. Naturalistic, but not yet secular. Humanist Manifesto number 2, by the way, is mind-numbingly long. It just goes on forever. But it addressed a whole new litany of societal concerns, and playing way down its knocking and attacking of capitalism that the first manifesto in 1933 had called for. Manifesto number 2 in 1973 called for international cooperation, protections for the global environment, promoting new rights, especially for women and minorities, which the 1933 intellectuals didn't even think of. The one in 1933 is filled with phrases like manly virtues and the humanist he is, blah, blah, blah. Okay. It did call for an end to racial, religious, and sexual discrimination, and even criticized sexism and sexual chauvinism. But most important phrase in there, as far as I'm concerned, was, as non-theists, we begin with humans, not God, nature, not deity, non-theists. Problem, as with all movements, you get original agreement and then splinter groups. You know, people argue, splinter groups come up. Conflict over ideas and ideals turns into personal conflict, and the movement started to break up. Paul Kurtz was very unhappy with the still leftward bent of a lot of the people in the leadership of the American Humanist Association, some of whom in the mid-1970s were still making excuses for Stalin. And he was impatient with religious humanism, and he pulled out, and he founded the Council for Democratic and Secular Humanism, which within about a year became the Council for Secular Humanism. And in 1980 he issued a Secular Humanist Declaration, which is pretty much Humanist Manifesto number 3. And I promise that's as far as we go with manifestos, I promise. But it was signed by 58 intellectuals from around the world, including Isaac Asimov, Francis Crick, Albert Ellis, Sidney Hook, B.F. Skinner, Sherwin Wine, and A.J. Ayer. Humanist intellectual all-star team. And it includes the statement that, quote, secular humanists may be agnostics, atheists, rationalists, or skeptics, but they find insufficient evidence for the claim that some divine purpose exists for the universe, unquote. Secular humanism, which, by the way, in the newsletter, I always print with lowercase, no capital S, no S, no capital H, because it's not a religion. So, secular humanism is what the dozen or so in 1988 wanted to form in New York. And the first mission statement that I could find in our archives is from January 1989, a year later, that quoted Al Tino, the organization's first chairman, in a mailer soliciting new members. Our goal is to create a secular humanist community in the New York area to promote the ideals of secular humanism and provide educational, intellectual, and social opportunities for both members and others who are interested, blah, 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 blah. Okay, you got it. We are agreed that secular humanism is not a religion, but an alternative approach to religion. The organization grew very quickly. As I said, this was mid-1988. By June of 1990, a dozen or so had grown to around 50. By 1992, it was 116. By 1994, there were 151 paid members. And the pages of the newsletter chronicle lots of meetings, lectures, social events. It was obviously an active, growing organization, and it attracted such honorary members who were also speakers at our, not mine personally, I was not there, but attracted such people as Isaac Asimov, Kurt Vonnegut Jr., and Arthur C. Clarke, who all spoke to the organization and were honorary members. But just as happened in the national movement, ideas and ideals start to, people say, well, yeah, right, but I've got a better idea, or you've got a lousy idea. And they just become personal very quickly, and the organization got in trouble. The most important member at the time was not the president or chairman, or whatever the hell it was then, but the man who did the newsletter, Warren Allen Smith, who was then and is still going strong as a gay activist, and he's also the man who has put together a huge couple of volumes of Who's Who in Hell. Google sometimes. At any rate, Warren, this was the early 90s, and the AIDS epidemic was raging, and rightly so, Warren felt that the government wasn't doing enough, and he wanted the organization to start doing the same things that ACAP was doing. Many people in the organization said they prefer to do checkbook activism, and some of them, small minorities, said, what the hell has this got to do with humanism? Anyway, I believe they were wrong, but there was a definite split in the organization, and Warren quit, and the organization went into the doldrums for several years. And the membership started to decline. Several years ago, and as I told you, I joined the organization in the late 90s, and it was just bopping along with about 90 members. And half a dozen people who were doing anything at all. A few people, Lee Loschek, several others, and our then president, Conrad Claiborne, we decided things had to change. And the way to change them was to start reaching out more. Very simple thing. We started a book club. The first book club meeting, we discussed, I forget the author's name, Terror in the Name of God. It's about Islamic terrorism. And this is 2004. And we met in Conrad's living room. 3 people. Conrad, me, and a woman who showed up and announced immediately that she was there to meet single eligible men.
Welcome to New York.
Conrad's gay, I'm happily married, we never saw her again. And I don't know whatever her name. But the book club took off. We started meeting every month, first in my living room, and then at the Muhlenberg Library, and now we moved over to community church on East 35th Street, and our editor, Elaine Lynn, has, every once in a while I say to her, that book is going to be over everybody's head. Nobody's going to understand it. She says, am I in charge? Yeah, you're in charge. And she gets 25 or 30 people in a room for a book that I didn't think would draw 10. Anyway, it's doing very, very well. We then started having Sunday brunches once a month. And it turned out people loved it. They started coming. And you could never could figure out what was going on, how it would work out. One morning in 2006, 2007, one Sunday morning, used to be at Fusion on East 56th Street, which was right next to the apartment building in which I live. February morning, blizzard. Wound up something like 10 inches of snow that day. Absolute disaster, okay? I didn't even bother putting on a coat because it was right next door. And I went over to tell them, nobody's going to show up, sorry. There were already several people there. And we wound up with 16 people all came in the blizzard for brunch. Can't figure it out. We now have moved to BXL East on East 51st Street. We get regularly 16 to 20, sometimes more, for pancakes. It's a Belgian restaurant. It's got about 80 different kinds of beer. That helps. In April 2007, we held our first movie night, showing a DVD of Jonathan Miller's Atheism in the back room of a saloon, the Stone Creek Lounge on East 27, and 22 people came. However, of course, when we show a Monty Python, we get 35. But then Monty Python does humanist movies, or 80s movies, so great, works out. And our vice president, Bob Murtha, just about a year ago, started the Great Lecture Series. There are now dozens and maybe hundreds of great lectures by people like Dawkins and Dennett and Harris and all the people who are in the news right now. And these lectures are available on DVD. So we go again to the back room of the Stone Creek Lounge. We watch and listen to a lecture for an hour. Then we talk for another couple hours over beers and burger. It's great. We hold special events several times a year with addresses by such people as Tom Flynn of the Council for Secular Humanism, who's also the editor of Free Inquiry magazine, Roy Speckhart, the executive director of the American Humanist Association, Michael Shermer, Susan Jacoby, Austin Dacey, Massimo Piucci, and Jennifer Michael Hatt. The next of those special events, as I mentioned before, is October 16th, our Freethought Day brunch at Pete's Tavern, where our distinguished speaker will be someone named Harold Hudson Channer. The topic, Free Thinkers I Have Known, 38 Years of Humanist Conversations. I hope some of you, all of you, will attend. By the way, what's Freethought Day?
I beg your pardon? I'm sorry, what?
The question was to the whole audience.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was turning off the sound.
And it was also rhetorical. What is Freethought Day? In 92, William Phipps, the governor of Massachusetts, outlawed spectral evidence in the courts in Massachusetts, thereby ending the Salem witch trials. In other words, the hysterical girls could not point to the corner and say, I see the devil right there in the corner, and he's, he's pointing his finger at the guy that we want to have stoned. And this was allowed as evidence until Governor Phipps said spectral evidence would no longer be allowed in the Massachusetts court. And rationality came in. Yes, sir?
Could you give a definition of spectral?
S-P-E-C-T-R-A-L, like specter, ghostly.
Ah, thank you.
Okay. Today, the Secular Humanist Society in New York has over 160 paid members, more than 40 paid subscribers to PIQUE, members and subscribers from places as far-flung as Australia, Liechtenstein, Switzerland, Denmark, Wales, Munich, Germany. And we exchange newsletters with about 20 other free thought groups, and we have an e-distribution list of over 350. Last year, as I said, we had joined. The organization was formed in 1988 and was formed as part of the Council for Secular Humanism, which had split off from the AHA, the American Humanist Association. But last year, the AHA approached us and said, in effect, they said, you guys are the humanist organization in New York. How about coming into the AHA fold too? Lee and I and another member met with the executive director, and we said, what the hell, why not? And so we are now members of both organizations. And we belong to another organization. And I would like you to become acquainted with it, to become acquainted with the Second Humanist Society of New York, yes, but also Reasonable New York. A few years ago, a young man by the name of Rich Sander, a lot of people would consider him young, but at my age I consider him young. He was relatively new to New York. He was bewildered by the number of different freethought groups in the city that seemed to schedule events at cross purposes with each other. So he started an online calendar, Richie's List, on his own. And he just collected information and said, the Second Humanist Society, New York is doing this on Tuesday, New York City Atheist is doing this on Wednesday, and blah, blah, blah. And it was a huge success. People started using it. That cooperative attitude that Richie's List inspired led the leaders of 8 different New York freethought organizations to get together in a West Side backyard for barbecue and beers a couple of summers ago. And our stated purpose was to work together when possible, and at least to keep from stepping on each other's scheduling toes. At the same time that we were coalescing into a group, a national organization that some of you may have heard of, the United Coalition of Reason, offered us a grant to advertise freethought in New York City. As an old madman who knows the cost of advertising in New York, I took the devil's advocate position, job really, of tamping down enthusiasm. People say, oh boy, we're going to put up a billboard, electronic billboard in Times Square. $10,000 will get you an appointment to talk about putting up an electronic billboard in Times Square. That was the budget we were given, $10,000. We never even got that. But what we did do, we put up a full-color 30 by 40-inch posters in 16 high-traffic Manhattan subway platforms for a month. The posters read, "1 million New Yorkers are good without God."
Wow.
And it was signed by what we then called ourselves the Big Apple Coalition of Reason. Those posters generated tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of media attention for us. I was interviewed by a few, there were 2 frontmen for it, me and Michael Ladora of the Center for Inquiry New York. He got a lot of, he's younger and better looking than me. He got a lot of the attention. But I got interviewed by Russian television. Their English language television.
Yeah.
We got thousands of hits on the websites of the various member organizations. By the end of the campaign, with the addition of new organization, Big Apple Coalition of Reason was expanded and rebranded into Reasonable New York, accessible on the web at reasonablenewyork.org. Reasonable New York. There are now 11 member organizations in the loose but working confederacy or consortium that we call Reasonable New York. In alphabetical order, the Brooklyn Society for Ethical Culture, the Center for Inquiry New York City, Center for Inquiry Long Island, Dinner and Philosophy Now, the Jolly 13 Club, New York City Brights, New York City Skeptics, New York Philosophy, New York Society for Ethical Culture, Richie's List, and last on the list alphabetically, Second Humanist Society of New York. All those groups worked together in August to promote a panel discussion on humanist ethics that I moderated on the 20th of August at Ethical Culture. We drew 285 people, many of whom stood in a half-block long line to get in on a summer Saturday night, and I was amazed that we drew that. There's an audience for us in New York. Some of the Reasonable New York member organizations, some of the Reasonable New York organizations are dues-paying member organizations, like SHSNY and the Century of Ethical Culture. But some are like Dinner and Philosophy Now and Richie's List, they're meetups, which are, of course, the social networking phenomenon of the 21st century. But all of them are vital and growing organizations. And all of them deserve your attention. They are interesting. There are interesting and articulate leaders in all the organizations that would make excellent guests on your programs.
Yeah. People
like Tunç Iyerboz. He's Turkish. Iyerboz. That's as close as I can come. As he says, that's as close as he can come too. Okay. Tunç is a Turkish American, a medical doctor and a researcher in the current Reasonable New York Chairman. Rich Sander of Richie's List, a very articulate and dynamic young guy who was the catalyst that brought us all together. Massimo Pigliucci, who is the chair of the Lehman College Philosophy Department and the organizer of Dinner and Philosophy Now, and is also an honorary member of SHSNY. Ann Clayson, the clergy leader of the New York Society for Ethical Culture, who was also the Humanist chaplain at Columbia University. And Michael Dodora, who I mentioned, the executive director of the Center for Inquiry in New York City, who is also Center for Inquiry's observer at the UN. And what the hell, me? We belong on your programs. I urge you to engage, both personally and professionally, with the freethought community in New York. There are great interviews, conversations, and debates, yours for the asking, starting at reasonablenewyork.org. I was about to ask the questions, I guess. Was that a question?
No, that was just a sort of cell phone talk. I mean, good. Very good, John. Very good. Very interesting, yeah. Maybe you could talk about PIQUE. And you said you had copies that you're going to let them know. That's
right.
A newsletter that you edit, I think, and everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's how I really got started. Working for the organization. I wrote a piece. I wrote an article, which led to writing another article, and then the editor asked me to join him in editing as co-editor, which I did, and just started getting more and more involved in the organization.
It's really good. I've read the one issue I had of it. It's really well written and really worthwhile.
Yeah. I know. No false modesty.
Yeah.
I know it's good.
Yeah, yeah.
I know it's good.
Mm-hmm.
I walk on thin ice with it, though. I would love, like my ideal issue of PIQUE. It's PIQUE, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm always making that so many people don't. PIQUE is a phrase that used to be used a lot when I was a kid. Was a fit of pique.
Yeah.
Which was it meant an anger, not anger really, but a smit. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Pique is annoyance.
Yeah.
It's being pissed off.
It's a great title. It really is. Yeah.
And I didn't make it up.
No,
I
it's
inherited it, and I love it.
What year was
Excuse me?
What year was PIQUE popular?
Oh, that
You
would
mean
have
the
been.
word?
Yeah.
Oh,
Centuries.
centuries.
For centuries.
Yeah.
It just started. People have started dropping it now.
No coward and things. Yeah.
What people say pissed off.
Yeah.
Okay. Or just pissed.
Yeah.
Okay, well, he wins every time. So anyway, as I say, I walk some thin ice with it because my ideal issue would be one that has only, is filled with 12 pages with membership essays, letters, but that doesn't happen. And so I reprint, which is a nice word for plagiarize, from other publications all over the country and the world, for that matter.
No, it's very valuable. I went into the archive. It's very
Sooner or
well.
later, I'm
Yeah.
getting nailed.
No.
So anyway, I'm gonna
We
get-
all do it.
so
In the end,
anyway,
we're all
you
dead,
know,
Keynes said.
a letter on some lawyer's stationery, but I'm operating on the principle that it's easier to ask forgiveness than to ask permission. I would
Yeah.
gladly
Yeah.
ask permission, except, you know, you gotta, in the same sort of, you know, you ask for permission, and it's gotta go through three levels.
Yeah, I know, it's a
You
pain
know,
in the neck.
People say, we'll get back to you next week.
Yeah.
And
Our
you say
committee
to them-
will,
you say
or
to
one
them,
of
"I'll
the
go
chairmen.
by here tomorrow."
Yeah, or the chairman of our committee might get back to you if the secretary lets him get on the phone.
Anyway, that's,
Yeah.
I have copies of the current issue of the October issue, and anybody who would like a free, short-term subscription, just give me your card and, or whatever, and I will see to it that you get it, and then in a few months, so one of our goons will come around with a baseball bat and suggest that you become a member.
The big ones, the big guys are gonna come our way.
Anyway, other questions?
Oh, well, there's many. Yeah.
Would you email this newsletter?
Not, my policy is not in the New York area. Do not. Why would people pay for it?
Oh, if they get an email, of course. That's why I'm asking.
Yes, we exchanged, just today before I came here, I got the HSSB newsletter in online, the Humanist Society of Santa Barbara. Okay, they get, they show me theirs, I show them mine. I should say, well, it's not online. We exchange newsletters with them, with the upstate South Carolina Secular Humanist, with Humanists of the Palm Coast, with atheists in Michigan, and you know, all over. With the National Secular Society of Great Britain.
And all of these organizations are growing too, in number and in
Yeah.
membership.
That's something you and I talked about in the interview last week.
Uh-huh.
In 1990, if you want newsworthy, the freethought community is newsworthy.
Yeah.
If you want newsworthy for your programs. In 1990, in Pew Research, which is about the most reliable research there is in terms of social trends in America, reported in their national, which folks, 10,000 sample, 4% of Americans said they had no religious affiliation. 1990. 2010, 20 years, 16%. Now that doesn't mean that they're atheists or agnostics, or they just say they have no religious identification. And we call them now the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. But the nuns have grown fourfold in 20 years. A lot of those people would probably call themselves Christians. You know, if somebody says, well, aren't you a Christian? They probably say, yeah, I am. But they identify with no organized religion. And that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
But I told Harold last week that that isn't even close to the record for America. In 1790, 90% of Americans did not belong to a church. Now, in 1790, saying you're a Christian was like saying you're a human being in Western civilization. You know, Christian means I'm not a barbarian. So I'm not saying that people didn't believe in God in 1790. What I'm saying was America was widely spread out, population of America was widely spread out, and people did not belong to churches, which is one of the reasons that the circuit riders of the Methodists and the Baptists in the next 10 to 20 years did so well, because they went out and went to the people, whereas the Anglicans and the Episcopalians sat there in their beautiful churches and waited for people to come to them. In 1790, by the way, the first couple of years of the American Republic, in 1790, government offices were open on Sunday. They were open on Christmas. The first couple of decades of the American Republic were the most secular years in the history of the United States. Well, the history of North America, for that matter. No matter what you hear from Michelle Bachmann, the founding fathers of America, whose grandfathers and great-grandfathers died in religious wars in Great Britain and Germany, they created a secular government deliberately. And I don't care, you can, Rick Perry and Michelle Bachmann and Newt Gingrich can talk till they're blue in the face about how the founding fathers tried to, wanted to establish a biblically based government. That's baloney. Absolutely untrue. The absolute reverse is true. It was only when the American public, the Second Great Awakening that began 1815, 1820, lasted for 30 or 40 years, was a huge upswell of religious fervor in this country. And so government offices started closing on Sundays. Well, when you think about it, the guy had a farm out 15 miles from the nearest church. That church was town, whether you were talking about Vermont or Kentucky or South Carolina. Guy has a farm. He works his farm 7 days a week. Sunday morning, he gets up and he milks the cows or whatever the hell, stalks the pigs, or whatever he has to do. And everybody gets in the wagon and they go 5 or 10 miles into town to go to church. Well, he wants his mail. It's where the post office is. The government, it's the only time that the majority of Americans were able to visit their government, to go to the post office, to see the clerk, to register the birth of a child, or to do anything else, or to have a deed signed, or anything else like that. The government had to work on Sunday, and it did. First 20 years of American Republic, most secular years in American life. Sir?
So the point you're trying, what's the point you're trying to say? Because people went to church on Sunday and the post office was open, that there was a crime? Was there a crime to go do that?
Was there a crime? I'm not following.
I'm trying to follow you. Are you saying the farmer worked, family went into town, they went to church, the farmer wanted his mail, so he went to the post office, and the post office person gave him the mail.
Yeah.
So what's the point? I don't understand.
The point is,
it was open, Sunday was claimed a holy day for the majority of the people. There was Saturdays where the Jehovah's Witness and Seventh-day Adventists also went to pay worship to whomever, who they call Jehovah or God. I'm trying to see the point that you're saying. What happened?
my point, first of all, there were no Jehovah's Witnesses in 1790. I'm not sure about Seventh-day Adventists.
Well, the point is whether or not there were people that worshipped on Saturday, even though it may not have been a Jehovah's Witness or something.
Yeah, okay, but the vast majority of people went to church on Sundays.
Elementary.
Okay.
And
my point was
yes,
that the government was secular. The government offices stayed open. The post office is closed on Sunday now, right?
Sure.
And government offices, except for emergency services, are closed on Sundays.
Yes, and that's
What I'm
because,
saying is, I only brought this up as a side light. What I'm saying was that what I'm saying is that in the first couple of decades of the American Republic,
right,
the government was secular.
okay,
That's all.
all right.
Not a small matter, not a
No,
small
no, I
matter
don't
at
think
all.
it's a small matter at all. By the way, this comes from Susan Jacoby's book, Free Thinkers, and which I urge on everybody. It's a fascinating book, absolutely fascinating book.
One of the things they would be against is any kind of absolutism. I just saw an article in the Wall Street Journal the other day by Michio Kaku celebrating some event that occurred at CERN in the particle, the accelerator there. So that's really questioning. And he ended it up by saying that scientific state of mind or thinking is that there are no absolutes. You want to avoid absolutes that are going to trump whatever kind of reading of history or sociological development is saying, well, God said this, and what you're saying isn't, but it's going to be an ever opening upon understanding increasingly. And that's an issue that I think is really very, very important, to have that kind of an open mind in thinking rather than some God or some principle that overrides the normal reading of human development.
We've had news just in the last couple of weeks, actually in the last week, that there's the experiment that was just done by where, I forget, that there's a possibility that a particle was shot through faster than the speed of light.
That's exactly the point.
A lot of people would say that in science there are absolutes, like the speed of light.
Well, that's...
Okay? Now, what I found very interesting in the newspaper accounts of that, and also the online accounts that I read of that, I read remarks from a number of different scientists. All of them were skeptical about whether this thing actually worked. And practically all of them said the same thing. Let's somebody go to work to see if we can replicate the experiment.
I saw
Nobody said, don't do it.
Yeah, right.
Nobody said,
Exactly.
no.
Yeah, that's the
Everybody said, let's try it. And
Lynn
that's the difference.
Margulis, our leading biologist, coming in now saying the whole scientific process is being threatened. And the scientific process itself by politicized absolutism. And that's a danger in a synergistic universe. And so it's really important to have an opening upon, because the knowledge is coming in so rapidly now for explaining things within a materialistic context, as well as the other things that we've had to do to deal with our
So
self-reflective
that's a good
consciousness.
thing. That's a good thing.
Yeah, an openness on
Of course
things.
it is.
And but you know, Mendeleev, when he had the elements, they're going to get down to the elements. I can remember he got 92. There were different elements we had to learn when we were in school and everything. Now I was surprised. I looked the other day in the news and there's 122. We thought there were 92 elements. That's it. That's the element.
By the way,
Yeah.
let's not forget Carl Sagan's warning, too.
Yes, sir.
You keep an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out.
All right. Well, that's very good. Very good.
You know, like the people who say, keep an open mind about astrology.
Yeah.
No.
Yes. Right.
How about extending that argument about an open mind to a secular society? There are people who are not secular. They hate the word secular.
Yes.
Would they be in a position to take over if we are too secular?
I'm sorry, I'm a little gay.
Yeah? Would they be in a position to take over if we are too secular?
Yes.
Take over.
United States are not limited
There can be people who are against secular,
People may be belonging to a different religion.
like say
Non-sectarian.
Zoroastrianism.
Not
He's
not
a
necessarily
Zoroastrian, I happen to know from
so.
Iran.
People of, let's say, certain religions do not believe in secularism.
Okay.
We are so much believing in secularism and so much of an open mind. To what extent should we have the open mind?
politics.
I don't have the answer to that. We should have open minds, but I don't know how open.
Now, but now, what if other people exploit that?
Of course, of course. This is what I mentioned. The reason why I got interested was when in humanism, secular humanism, was in the mid-1990s when I realized that the know-nothings that I laughed at earlier in my life, were in a position where they were dictating what was being taught to children in America. They were telling Congress what to do. One of the things that knocked me out completely was in the mid-1990s, more than 40 congressmen and women, representatives and senators, standing on the steps of the Capitol with Reverend Sun Myung Moon, honoring him, honoring him, and introducing bills in Congress to honor that lying, tax-cheating screwball, okay? And I couldn't believe that these people were actually making such inroads in the government of the United States of America, the country that I grew up in. Couldn't believe it. Yes, ma'am.
Well, believe that when Sun Myung Moon, especially coming in 2000, whenever he had an event, or maybe significant, George Bush Sr., Ronald Reagan, were part of the company.
Yeah.
I went to a conference once in Washington, they were honoring you, and I couldn't believe that the MC was Oliver North, and the speaker for the evening was Haig. It was hard to sit in my seat. So I don't think we should misunderstand the secular humanists, anyone, that there is also political realities. And those realities are affected by capitalism.
Yeah. By the way, in terms of politics,
It's affected more by votes and money.
Well, the politics certainly the money will have to decide what the votes are going to go.
One moment. In terms of politics, because I'm the editor of the newsletter for the organization, I get to steer the politics because I decide what's going to go in the newsletter. And my principle, right from the beginning, has been that we keep, unless it's about humanism, unless it's about concerns directly concerned with humanism, no. The thing I wrote 7 or 8 years ago, and I still work the newsletter by it, when George W. Bush was in office, I said, if you want to complain about George W. Bush's faith-based initiatives, this is your forum. You want to talk about his tax policies? Write a letter to the Times. It has nothing to do with what we're focused on. And so I'm a left of center, well left of center, liberal, but as far as I'm concerned, I don't want to keep conservatives out. We want more people, not fewer. And by conservatives, I mean real conservatives. I mean, who's against smaller government, lower taxes, and good defense?
I am against that.
Okay, you're against it. I'm not. But I am against the crazies of the right wing who have taken over the word conservative now.
But those are the crazies that was running government.